and we had a bunch of provocations this afternoon. And I wanted the three of you to join me to see if we can try to make sense of this, because we've heard a lot of different input. We started the morning with sort of the bare bones news from some of the chief economists, just laying out for us what exactly the volume of challenge is, the nature of the challenge is in downtown cores, and what's the challenge that this recession, the COVID recession, is going to cause. And then we've had lots and lots of questions and aspirations about if we come back, can we come back differently? Can we see downtowns emerge differently? Nobody seems to want to go back to what they were. Lots of questions then about, well, how do we do that? How do we make them more inclusive? How do we make them more interesting? How do we make them more resilient? Can we deal with the climate challenges as we bring back? So lots and lots of big questions looming, and it's your job, and the three of you are up to the task, to see if you can set us on a course about what you think the actions are that need to be taken. Are there tangible things that we should be advocating for? You know, the CUIs and the connective tissue business, I always say that we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who are really engaged in advocating for Canada's cities. Bruce Katz has joined us a number of times. Happy to have you back, Bruce. And he's got a North American perspective and an international perspective because he's worked in Europe as well. And I know that, you know, as the US goes, so we go. And we're fascinated always to hear what's going on and what your perspective would be, appreciating that the architecture of governance is different in the two countries. But at the same time, I think there's a reckoning happening here in Canada that we need to govern differently. We need to resource municipal governments differently. We need to make decisions differently. And it'll be interesting to see if this is our moment. Do we have a moment to turn the hourglass in a different kind of direction? So we're keen to have, Bruce is going to talk with us a little bit about his experience, his perspective in the big wilds of the United States of America. And then Damien and Theo will join with him and we'll have a broader conversation. And of course, as usual, folks, put some stuff in the chat. Please add panelists and attendees so that everybody can see it. And particularly people that have been with us for the duration are really interested if you've got a moment to just reflect on what are the common key things you've heard from all these different people who spoke about Mumbai and Delhi and Hong Kong and London and San Francisco, and you talked about all sorts of places. So, and of course, a gazillion Canadian cities too. So over to you, Bruce, and then I'll come over back to Theo and to Damien.
Well, thanks, Marion. It's great to join everyone. I can't believe you've been on since 10:30. It's just like, it's either sadistic, masochistic, or
yeah, those things. All of that. All of that.
Is that a Canadian thing? Or
yeah, it's uniquely Canadian. But let me just say that we've had some extraordinary inspiration. You know, we heard Castellum talk about an extraordinary 6,000 unit development, Indigenous led on Indigenous lands in partnership with the local municipality and what they're going to try to do there. And we've had all sorts of people who have vacillated, I think, between how hopeful and how will change come. So it's been more positive and uplifting than one might have expected, even though it's a bit of a marathon.
So here's a couple thoughts, and I you know, you've got just tremendous people who've been presenting and who are on this panel. So let me just give you this perspective. It's not on what to do, but how to do it. I think in the US, as we're looking towards large federal spending, the Build Back Better recovery plan, right now we're still doing rescue, the American Rescue Plan, that's 1.9 trillion. It'll be a little less, but it's very large. But you know, that's the rescue plan to vaccinate the country, to deal with COVID-proofing schools, to get money to unemployed and American families and households, to provide fiscal relief to cities. But coming later is really the larger transformational plan. And that will hopefully involve a significant investments in innovation and infrastructure, in human capital, in climate solutions, community rebuilding. And the cut across to that could be spending put into the service of equity. More Black and Latino owned businesses, diverse hiring, community wealth building, because this pandemic has had a brutal effect on small businesses and the incomes and assets of Black and Latino Americans. And so I know the focus here is on central business districts and downtowns, but the broader focus within cities is essentially this devastating impact on those demographics and the decimating of commercial corridors, business districts, and main streets. So the first order of business is, how do you get ready for large amounts of federal spending? This is like Amazon HQ2 on steroids, but everyone wins, right? Everyone gets an allocation or is able to compete for really critical activities. And so what we're working on in the US with a small group of cities, about 6 or 7 to start, but then to blow out to the entire country, are essentially stimulus command centers where cities can declare their priorities, quickly articulate those priorities, whether it is around the central business district, the riverfront, et cetera, or the broader city environs, articulate those priorities to the Congress and the Biden administration, begin to reverse engineer federal policies so that it's in the service of cities and is structured in such a flexible way that you can adapt to the issues of a Portland versus a Pittsburgh or a Phoenix, and then ultimately deploy with these equity issues in mind. So stimulus command centers, steering committees of public, private, and civic actors. We're working with LA, Louisville, Philadelphia, Birmingham, Dayton, Kansas City, St. Louis to get this going. And then the key part in this wonderful federalist republic of ours is to then have command centers at the bottom begin to affect how large federal spending, again, is actually deployed. So think of a major city with a multi-dimensional project. In Philadelphia, we have 1,300 acres along our riverfront. It's an older, environmentally polluted energy site. Well, if you're going to put that back into productive use, you need environmental remediation, you need infrastructure, you need workforce training, you need small business support. So how do you get a national government to organize itself across its vertical silos? How do you go from a silo to a system? More horizontal, more network, the way cities operate. So we're thinking this is going to be a critical part of organizing for the recovery, irrespective of which part of the city you're looking at, irrespective of what vertical topic, education versus employment versus industry and innovation, infrastructure. How do we begin to organize ourselves? And cities set priorities that are really aligned with their market dynamics and their networks. The second piece I would just say is the private stimulus that's coming. There is so much capital because of what has gone on in the stock market, led by consumer savings, but a lot of other factors. And so we have a public stimulus moving. But the public sector is not going to remake markets, right? And a lot of what has to happen are new kind of financial products or new kind of capital stacks, particularly around the growth of Black and Latino business, and particularly around some of these multidimensional projects. And so as cities are going forward, understanding the role of private capital and providing new vehicles and products for that capital to deploy smartly. Because if it doesn't deploy smartly, I can guarantee you there's going to be a lot of parasitic money out there, a lot of predatory money. They're going to come in, swoop in, and take bits of cities, particularly in the high-performing cities, and begin to establish their own position for the value appreciation that's ultimately going to come. The last piece I'll say, Mary, and this has been sort of a hobby horse of mine, God knows forever, but I do think if you think about the how, not just the what, but the how, ownership of land and ownership of assets is so absolutely critical going forward, because we could see, given what's going to happen to our downtown central business districts, I don't think the same effect will happen around university hubs. I think university hubs will be stronger, more resilient. But there could be some commercial real estate shifts both within our central business districts and in portions of our commercial corridors, into public ownership. And the question for the public sector is, can you unify, integrate your public assets, the land and buildings you own, and move from a fragmented system? In the US, it's the ports, the airports, the rail, the convention center, the stadia, the school districts, the parking authorities. I mean, you name it, we have a public authority for it. There's no unified look at assets. And if you look at what has happened in Copenhagen over the last 30 years, or Hamburg, or Helsinki recently with the reconstruction and revitalization of their older ports, the disposition of public assets is going to be disproportionately important, I think, in the aftermath of this. One of the few places in the US that is actually seeming to get its grips around this is Tulsa, Oklahoma. They are in the process of merging their industrial authority, their redevelopment authority, and their parking authority so that they can get a unified disposition of assets in the service of inclusive and sustainable growth. So bottom line, as we move forward, we're all going to have some very interesting ideas about what the post-pandemic city looks like. But can we deploy federal capital? Can we begin to innovate on private investment? And can we do the institutional reform that we need so we actually can leverage up the possibility of long-term value capture for cities? There is going to be a competition for revenues in 2022, 2023, 2024. This is just the beginning of it. We're in a longer transition post-pandemic. The feds will be with us this year, but we all know at the end of the day, cities need to really control their own destiny. So I'll leave you with that as a sort of an early problem.
That's a good tour de force of what we've been sort of struggling with. I mean, certainly here, Canadian municipalities are in dealing with, they're operating on fumes, basically. They have transit systems that they were the larger ones, dependent on the fare box. They haven't got the ridership. They're, as you just suggested, the federal government is stepping up with various kinds of investments, but it's not going to take them past 2022. So, and who knows what the patterns and the requirements will be then. So, couple of interesting things, just to reinforce what you just said. So Craig Alexander this morning, who's the chief economist with Deloitte, he's been chief economist pretty well everywhere. He had this staggering statistic. Somebody can put it into the chat if I haven't quite got it right. But just so you know, this is big money talking for us in Canada, Bruce. The normal amount of personal savings, I think, is something like $12 billion. And somebody in the chat, who I can really appreciate people who are putting summaries of what they've heard over the day in the chat. Thanks, keep doing that. Yes, the typical is about 12 billion. And he says that during this last year, during the pandemic, Bruce, $212 billion is sitting in Canadian bank accounts. And that has to do with lots of government transfers that have been supporting people. And it has to do with the fact that those of us that enjoyed the privilege of working from home didn't have much to spend our money on. I guess that's the argument. So there's the public stimulus and the private stimulus. And there was some speculation, well, will we see the roaring 20s? Are people going to flood in and start spending money differently? And the other thing that just keeps looming for people is, are people going to really stay with digital purchasing? Is that, and is basically Main Street retail not salvageable? So I'm going to go to Theo next, because she is a Main Street retailer. She is in that sector. And the last thing I'll just say, Bruce, is I'm so with you about CUI is about horizontal, connective tissue. And Canada, like you, everything is siloed. Municipal governments relate to provinces, relate to the federal government, and we haven't done a good job of horizontal at all. And that's part of what CUI is trying to advocate for. And what we've seen in this pandemic is that people have had to learn from each other. And so they've had to create their own. Okay, Theo, you're a connective tissue person because you run a BIA. So talk to us a little bit about what your perspective is.
I do. I mean, just to go from Bruce's macro view, incredible view, Bruce, to my world, which is 44 city square blocks in Vancouver, where I run the Strathcona Business Improvement Association. We're one of 22 BIAs in the city of Van. And, you know, that's my unit on unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We have over 800 business members. We're a very diverse and arguably one of the most challenging BIAs in the city, and I would even say the province, given our proximity to a community called the Downtown East Side. You know, I've been thinking and reflecting a lot on what's been shared, and what Bruce is saying. Everyone wins. I have to say, year by year, as I move deeper into placemaking and this work of urbanism and city building, given where I am geographically in the communities that I support, the business communities and social enterprises, COVID has decimated an already vulnerable and marginalized community in East Van and in Strathcona. We have significant challenges regarding addiction, housing, homelessness, mental health, poverty. And I think that the big takeaway for me with all these conversations today is, as placemakers, as urban leaders, we really have to pull on our social activism hats in bigger, more dramatic ways. If you are connected to any of this work, no one has an excuse not to be advocating for what I feel are the three most critical areas right now, which is a universal basic income. I think we're seeing fascinating examples of that with this pipeline of grants and supports to people, and what happens when people have financial agency in their life and in their savings account. I think we need to advocate for socialized childcare. You know, that's huge. We were just listening to statistics around real estate, mixed use, scalable. That includes being able to put women in the workforce. And then I think the third piece is to really tackle and take on, as placemakers, the devastating opioid crisis. And the health outcomes it's leading to, which means you need to be advocating for safe supply and all of the social infrastructure, if we're talking about infrastructure, that go with it. And so, you know, I don't know if this feels different than maybe placemaking and BIA leadership from 20 years ago, but today we are as much business leaders as we are social change advocates. And it's at that intersection where things get real uncomfortable. So you should feel uncomfortable, right? It should be hard. And I feel really fortunate because in a way, my scale is just 44 city square blocks right now. And I'm working on a series of projects with the city of Vancouver and my other partners and colleagues and unlikely allies in social change services to ensure that our local economy is thriving while ensuring the residents and people who call that space home, literally on the streets, also have a leg up and an opportunity to survive. So that's sort of the big picture from where I'm sitting, and I'm really curious to hear from others.
The thing that, you know, we all started by saying, oh, COVID is, you know, everybody's in the same boat. And then we all quickly realized, nope, that is not true. If you didn't have a home to shelter to, if you were precariously employed, if you had already had public health, you didn't have the amenities or the services in your community that would normally provide some support, plus maybe you couldn't get to them. So as you suggest, Theo, this is layered, and we at COI had started with a Bring Back Main Street effort to look at how the retail businesses and the sense of attachment and belonging that you became very dependent on because you were stuck somewhere, how were they going to be affected? But we've now linked it to the downtown conversation because they're two sides of the same coin. And Damien, you are immersed in the reality of downtown Montreal, which is a downtown that is in crisis for a bunch of complicated reasons. And Theo, thank you for mentioning about the whole issue of safe supply, because people like Bruce, you may not know, and others who aren't familiar with the Canadian scene, more people have died from opioid overdose in Western Canada than have died from COVID. So it's an extraordinarily challenging thing that was exacerbated by contamination of supply and all sorts of other issues during COVID. So Damien, just take us to Montreal. We'll go from one end to the other. What's your perspective in your capacity as an innovation advocate and as a placemaker?
So, bonjour from Montreal, bonjour de Montréal, and thanks for the invitation, Mary. I'm going maybe to bring a French touch of accent and of examples. And I will begin about what we're doing with the District of Innovation of Montreal. And 7 years ago, McGill University and ETS University decided to create the first, I will say, playground of innovation. And we're working on 4 pillars. The first is industrial, the second urban, the third is a social and cultural, and the last one is about training and research. And what we did, it's to we trying to cultivate an ecosystem, and unique ecosystem with the private, academic, public sectors, for and with the citizen, for and with the citizen, twice. Why I'm saying that twice? Because we're working for the citizen, and it's very important what we wanted to do and what we're doing. It's a life area of downtown of Montreal, and we're working. The idea is to put the citizen and to put the innovation around, and to see how it's possible to humanize our downtown of Montreal. It's easy to say, quite difficult to do. So it's the presentation of the district of Montreal. I can see two challenges. The first one for me and for us will be about the vacancy offices. Right now in Montreal, normally we have 600,000 workers who's coming downtown each day. And right now the number is around 50,000, okay? So it's a disaster. And first of all, the workers, some livings, downtowns, but they are the consumers. And what we need to know before to keep going is to know the human resources, of the big companies and the holding. So we're working with universities. Some university says and did some inquiry, and we are between 15 and 20% of workers who's going to stay home. But when I'm speaking with my members, holdings and big companies, it's more 40% who's going to stay home. So it's huge, the gap is huge. So we need to know exactly what happened with the private sectors about that. And the second topic, I think it's the most important. It's about how we can renew downtown, and it's not just about economic side, but we need to think a new deal. If I'm taking the example of Montreal, we have the chance to. Montreal has the largest number of university and numbers of students in Canada, and the second in North America. The first town is Boston. After that, you have Montreal. 220,000 students and researchers. And what we need is to trust and to work with the young generation. And so what we have to do, it's not just to work with the economic side and to use and to try to do the same recipes. We have to see how it's possible to include the new generation, the millennials, and it's very important. The second example that I will take, it's about cultural side. We have the chance in Montreal, and you have to know that the 7% of the GDP of Quebec, the province of Quebec, is coming from the cultural side. It's huge. So it's also very, very important to see how it's possible to give a place to this side, the cultural side. And if I had a magical wand, what I will do, it's I asked to my employee Julie, and she's with us right now, how I can translate. I don't like the name forum, but it should be a big bang of ideas. And what we need right now, it's a vision and project, and not just project. Why we need vision? We need to explain to the citizen, to the population, how we can do something different, and with project, of course. So what will be very, very interesting to see, to ask to the mayor, an example of the downtown of Montreal, of different metropolis, to be the leader, and to, when you're doing, to be the conductor, and to be able to conduct, like an orchestra, to conduct all the strength, the know-how of the city, and to be able to do something very new and dare something new, not just about economical side, but with citizen. We don't have to forget that downtown, we have people who are living. We have to listen to the citizen and to see how it's possible to do something different, but with everybody. And I will say about the vision, we need, of course, when we're doing open innovation, we need to have a conductor, but we need also to have some leaders, some ambassadors to be able to preach the good news and to see how it's possible to go for further of the project. And I will finish with something. In 1929, when we have the big crisis, in French, we say in the 30s, we had les années folles, the crazy years. And I will say we have the chance, I don't know if it's a good word, to live right now the crazy years where it's possible to dare and where it's possible to have someone who's going to help us to go further and to be able to do something. But we have to find including a policy to do that. And I'm looking for a magical one. So if someone has I will be very interesting to buy one and to try to do that. But we don't have to forget something. You began this morning with 3 economists, and I would like to finish with just human being. And we have to think that downtown Montreal and downtown Metropolis, we have human beings who live in the city, and they have to be part of the discussion of the new ideas, and it's an amazing opportunity.
It is an amazing opportunity. I hear you. Bruce, when you hear both Damien and Theo, who are talking from quite different experience, quite different vantage points, but they have a lot of common challenge with these 2 cities, Vancouver and Montreal. And I would say we have had people from Calgary have been on with us all day. They had 400 empty office floors before COVID even hit. Toronto obviously is here, Ottawa's here, Halifax is here, lots of different experiences. When you talk about the command center, I think that's the language
Right.
you were using. How do you empower that command center to actually have any clout? And how do you ensure that command center is embracing all the diversity of stakeholder, everybody from the street involved person to the business person to the, you know what I mean, to the tourist? How do you do that? How do you satisfy all those competing constituencies that normally kind of duke it out, but now we're at sort of the starting line? How do we start with everybody?
Well, I think this is a question about design and delivery. Again, what I'm talking about with the public side is the federal government is designing the Build Back Better plan. The federal government does not educate one child. It doesn't build one home. It doesn't start one business. I mean, the delivery happens locally. So to some extent, cities are already empowered. The networks of cities, within cities, public, private, civic, community, they already are empowered if they basically recognize and realize their power. And command centers, some of these will be set up out of city halls. Some will be done in collaboration with the business community. There can be many efforts done. I mean, I put something in the chat. I never know with these chats who the hell I'm sending stuff in. But in any event,
it's here. I can see it.
Oh yeah, but in Buffalo, for example, going back a decade, they began to do large-scale thinking, visioning, and ultimately action around the regeneration of the east side of Buffalo, which is historically disadvantaged community. Well, there should be a command center on the east side of Buffalo to take what they've already done the next stage, because as Theodora is saying, that's the place, that's the part of the city that has been hit hardest, by the pandemic. Now, as the east side of Buffalo begins to think about its future, there's a wonderful historic food market there. There's the old central terminal that used to be the rail station. So suddenly, as you're thinking about a quote unquote disadvantaged community, you're raising up infrastructure questions, large scale adaptive reuse, which could trigger and deploy federal spending. So, I think that command centers, need to work across the horizontal of the city, because we do have, this is like a 1950s phenomenon in the United States, the Robert Moses phenomenon. We create a lot of public authorities, you know, and to some extent we took power away from the general purpose municipal government in the United States, and we gave it to these public authorities as a reaction to corruption at the time and to political machines and ethnic transition. Well, we now need to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. You know, I mean, because
to get this kind of, I mean, you're talking about a whole bunch of tools, but it requires a lot of coordination. I guess that's the point you're making. And we've had that through the day too, collaboration. But one thing you're talking about is the power of procurement.
yes.
So we're going to, so not only is stimulus money going to arrive from my bank account or from the federal government or the provincial government's bank accounts, but then they're going to spend the money on something. So the question is, how do you affect who receives that money? Now I heard Theo say universal basic income. That is a notion that's been circulating for some time in Canada. It's popular in some jurisdictions and really not popular in other jurisdictions. So in the interim, if that's something that's too difficult in terms of the federal kind of rollout of it, what's a shorter term fix, do you think, Theo? Can you, for instance, is there a way for us to create different kinds of rules and zoning and incentives to get people back into interacting with independent businesses on the streets in Strathcona?
I mean, if we're using Strathcona as an example, I think, and we're talking about procurement in particular, I think investing in social enterprise and those partnerships, I would say Vancouver is really a center of innovation in that space, working with marginalized community and communities who face employment barriers, where, you know, and then partnering with those organizations and those communities to bring services to the businesses in that community and just create this reciprocal economy is really interesting. And we have, you know, and that can be involved in infrastructure projects, buildings, businesses, retail, but it needs startup money.
Yeah. What about tax changes? What about using tax? We've got municipal, federal, and provincial taxes. Could we create a mix, a tax regime that would create a more level playing field for retail to come back? And at the same time, as Bruce was just suggesting, let's incentivize more adaptive reuse for existing buildings. Montreal's got a ton of them. We are thinking about, there's going to be some real estate that's going to become available, right?
Yeah, I'll tell you, in Vancouver, you know, our business community, you know, carries almost 50% of you know, the responsibility of our public systems, the cost of our public systems, and represents 7% of the tax base. So the equity there it's so out of whack that is the first step, is bringing that into more alignment. And it's not a popular advocacy point, because city council and mayors don't win votes when they transfer residential, you know, commercial tax to residential. So that's a tricky one.
And are we going to, and we may see some of that. I don't know, Damien, whether in Montreal, what the thinking is, but that already had happened in Calgary and Edmonton. They had already shifted some of the property tax away from the business sector when the oil and gas collapsed a number of years ago, and put more burden on residences. As you say, Theo, not a popular thing. But how do we square that? How do we right size this? How we're going to generate public revenue? Go ahead, Damien, and I'll come back to you, Bruce.
I won't say it's about tax and money. It's about to trust the new generation. And I'm going to give you two examples. We have the chance in Montreal to have more than around 2,500 startups. And when I spoke about give the chance to the new generation to be part of the process, it's not just about money, it's about to be part of something. The last week, we began the vaccination campaign, and we tried to see how it was possible with a startup, and the name is Drone des Champs, how it's possible to use the drone to clean the place when you have after the vaccination, you know, how it's possible to use music, how it's possible to use murals, and you have different startups. We have to see the strength that we have and to give a chance. And it's not just right now about money and tax. It's not just that. It's the fact that we have to give the possibility to the new generation to act with us and to listen to. You know why? Because because they're going to be the next generation who's going to manage our cities. And I'm not sure that they're going to be agree with the policy that we have right now, and that's why it's so complicated. We did an experience a couple of months ago with a commercial association, and we did a mashup, and we say to the startups, okay, we need the best way to renew the downtown of Montreal. And you know what? We are very, very surprised because the startup who won the prize was the startup who did and was doing mural. And so what she's doing right now, the girl, she's painting inside the parking some murals. And it's not about just money, it's about to see the know-how of the people. And it means something right now, because as I told you before, it's not just about the fact that you using the same recipe, it doesn't work anymore. Mm-hmm. And it's like a bing bang that we're living right now. And we have to see which tool we can use to give the possibility to the young generation to be part of the process.
Yeah, I hear you that you really want to create containers that empower folks. Bruce, one of the things that you've been advocating for so long is this idea of non-formal governance arrangements, different kinds of regional alliances. And I see that Marcy Birchfield's on the session today, and she's with the Toronto Board of Trade running the Economic Blueprint Initiative, which she's taking and talking to cities across the country about. And we're pleased to be helping advance this notion that you need these kinds of horizontal infrastructures. Is that part and parcel of your command notion? Is it a regional thing? And is it an inclusive thing to draw in the constituencies that Theo and Damien are citing? Can it be that? Can it be all of that?
Well, here's the bottom line. It can be whatever a place wants it to be. I mean, the worst thing for the national government to do in the United States is tell everyone how to organize themselves. It's not our culture, right? I mean, so,
doesn't seem to be working over here very much either, even though we're more of a colony. But
yeah, I think what's going to happen is City X will organize with City Hall leading in collaboration with the private and the civic and the community sectors, labor unions. Another place will do it at the metropolitan scale. Another place, no one has a pulse, and therefore the neighborhoods will do it. I mean, It's going to be one of these chaotic moments. But bottom line, the cities need to lead here, because the federal money, once you apply infrastructure, innovation, or human capital, or actually deploy it in purposeful ways, that takes local agency. I mean, and that agency is across sectors. It doesn't reside just in the public sector. So I think a lot of different things, predictable and completely unpredictable, are about to happen. I mean, and that's the way we roll. I mean, I suppose. I mean,
well, you kind of want to roll that way. I mean, I think most of us that are urbanites or urbanists or lovers of cities don't really want anybody telling us that there's one way to build a city. We want to have that flexibility. I'm wondering about, though, this personal agency piece. So you're talking about the infrastructure, the governance infrastructure to get things coordinated. What about if we go more granular? How much power is there, Theo, in buy local? How much power can there be if we, I mean, I'm trying to get where's the intersection point as we start to advocate like crazy? We come out of COVID. Do we say to people, spend your money locally? How effective is that?
Oh, well, I feel like that's such an obvious answer. It's all, Amy Robertson of Buy Local British Columbia is the go-to expert. And I think Amy's actually one of our audience members, incredible thinker, thought leader, and an influencer and mentor of mine. Again, that local purchasing power is a component of better business and social justice, because you're participating in reciprocity, a reciprocal economy where you're keeping, it's not just money, it's jobs and like well-being in a geographic area. And Strathcona is hyper local, right? We have a lot of makers, industrial creators. We've had to create new zoning designations to adapt and scale to new uses and new kinds of businesses, very much to what Damien says, to listen to the younger generation, of which I am part of. I am a millennial leader who is consistently frustrated with the bureaucracy of city. You know, it's all part of making sure we stay flexible, and that fits into the buy local messaging. I do encourage everyone to check out British Columbia's buy local initiative led by Amy Robertson. It's stellar.
Amy's put some stuff into the chat. Thanks. And so is Marcy. Thanks, gals. You know, I think it's this question of where do we put our effort? You know, what's our focus? So what I'm hearing from you, Bruce, is you're challenging regional and city governments, as you say, whatever configuration works, to get themselves into a place of coordination and priority setting so that they then can channel and prioritize whatever form of investment starts to flow, right?
No, and it's a time to think big. That we've all been challenged in the United States after 4 years of just hell to come out of this and think differently about inclusive growth, sustainable growth. So I got to tell you, when I'm in a bunch of cities and they're showing me projects that are like, quote unquote, the priority projects for surface transportation, roads or rail or whatever, a lot of them feel like legacy projects. If they've gotten to the top of the priority list, that's probably means they started in 1995 or something.
Yeah.
So I think it's time to like just push ourselves. Even though a lot of us are tired, but eventually we're going to come out of our basements. And then to add up here, I mean, to really aggregate. So instead of just each of the silos locally putting forward their propositions, we begin to integrate spatially, particularly given what's happening to our central business districts, integrate sectorally. I mean, we should use this moment to provide credentials to millions of Americans. You know, I mean, we've got AI, we've got robotics, we've got machine learning, we've got, you know, a whole new world of location science. This should be the redo, right? I mean, I think the Biden administration definitely is sending those signals. The politics of the US, as you know, is miserable, fragmented, fractured, divided, and all the rest. But, you know, we've got to start putting forward, like, just where do we go? Well, this is going to be one of these things that people write about for centuries, what we're going through right now. So do we come out of this, you know, with a new kind of vision, ambition, aspiration?
I think this is one of those moments when we just don't want to lose. Never waste a crisis, right? And there are certain segments in urbanism that are much more kind of status quo. They want it to kind of go back to where it was. And won't that be a shame? We've had presenters coming in here saying, wait, Timothy Papandreou was here saying, wait a second, it wasn't great before, so what are we thinking? So we've got to pivot in a remarkable way. And Damien, your point about we need projects and vision. I'm with you on that, because I worry that we can do a lot of blah, 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 but
exactly.
we do need some stuff on the ground that people can see.
You know what, I will add something else. The Quebec government decided to create a couple of months ago the Blue Basket. And what is the Blue Basket? It's a site where it's possible to buy the Quebecers products. And I will love to see the Red Basket with the Canadian stuff. You know, we have to be proud of what we're doing, and it's the perfect timing to show what we are and how it's possible to promote the best, the cream of the cream, la crème de crème, and it's very important.
It's very heartening for Canadians to hear a Quebecer saying that, Damien. You've just made all your all your English Canadian colleagues happy.
I want a magical wand, and I want a red basket. A red basket.
I thought you were going to say you want a Montreal basket and a Strathcona basket, and that would be good too. So just as we wrap up here, because we've been at it a long time, if there were one thing that you want people to take away and really think thoughtfully about, just one simple thing about the future of downtowns, the future of central business districts, and how that connects to neighborhood economies and local economies, what's the one thing that people should, what's the North Star, Theo?
Just remember that our business challenges in these local environments are human challenges. And I'll just take 30 seconds to give you what my shining star right now and biggest challenge is. The Strathcona BIA just launched a partnership in social enterprise, one of the first of its kind in the country, working with a group of residents in the downtown east side who approached us, who knew that I was struggling with the cleanup of, I'm sorry to say, but human feces in our commercial districts, and said, we know how to deal with this. We are going to suit up. We are going to clean it up. We are going to deodorize. We are going to desanitize. You can call us. Your members can have private pickup. And the fact that we even need this social enterprise is challenging. And yet this group of residents came to me and said, we see a problem. This is a business for us. This helps your business members. This also provides data that we can give to the city of Vancouver so that they can inform their bathroom strategy. I mean, there's just so many connections here. And that is not, that there's deep vision behind something like that. Challenge, hyper-localism, and it addresses a human issue which solves a business issue. So look for those opportunities. And
entrepreneurship that solves a social challenge. One thing, Damien, what's your North Star? What's the one thing?
We have to be courageous, and we have to take risk and to dare. And it's the perfect timing, and to listen to the citizen, and not just economical side, not just academic side, but we have to listen to human being and to work together.
Bruce, one thing.
I mean, I think the one thing coming out is building wealth for a large portion of our population. All this pandemic has just shown is these enormous disparities in equities. And so whatever it's the central business district, it's around human capital, it's around infrastructure, whatever it is, we have to build wealth for a large portion of our population. And that may be too much of an American perspective, but it's just, man, this has been our comeuppance, you know?
Hopefully we want conditions where everyone can build, where everyone has an opportunity to build wealth themselves. Listen, thanks very much for joining us at the end of this long day, all three of you. Very different perspectives. We so much appreciate it. This was intended as a kind of kickoff for us on what are the priorities going forward to restore the core, rebuild our downtowns, and connect them to the neighborhood economies. So this is not the end, it's the beginning. We're going to be continuing to work with folks. We're going to continue to engage all of you. Thanks for tuning in. Bruce, of course, we've never losing your phone number. Bruce is going to come back in 3 weeks and talk to the city managers of Canada's largest cities about this idea of command centers and how regional approaches need to be implemented and why that's the future, to try to get a coordinated kind of get that. We need both vision and projects. I hear you. So thanks very much for being part of this conversation. I want to thank my colleagues at CUI, particularly Gina and Jamie, who have just had unbelievable logistic challenges, getting everybody on, everybody off, Zoom. They've been fabulous. They're over here on a different channel with me. And I want to thank them and all of my colleagues. So again, thanks very much, Bruce and Damien and Theo. Great to see you at the end of our day. Really, you were like the icing on the cake. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.